Doom Eternal may be the first game I've ever played where your frame rate affects the difficulty of the single player campaign. It's a no-brainer that, yes, frame rates higher than 60 FPS can provide a tactical advantage in competitive online FPS games, but for Doom Eternal, it's a different story. Take Rainbow Six Siege for example. It's a 5v5 game with a very competitive community that even goes as far as having its very own spot in tournaments next to Overwatch and CSGO. Cool thing about Rainbow Six Siege is that the next-gen upgrade allows you to play at 120 FPS and underlines that it's better to play under that setting for competitive reasons, opposed to playing at 60 FPS, the standard. That makes sense because you're fighting against real people in objective-based rounds, and everyone's goal at the end is to win and rise in the ranking score. Now, how does this relate to Doom Eternal? While it has an online 2v1 game mode that has a competitive following with Friday night fights, it also has a stellar single-player campaign that can be affected by frame rate. There's no real living and breathing players within the single-player campaign as of yet, just AI demons you fight, so there's no tactical advantages to having higher FPS, other than having the game look good. You may think that, but FPS plays a much different role within Doom Eternal. Depending on how high or how low your frame rate is, there are many advantages but also disadvantages that come along with playing the game at frame rates other than 60. But hey, if you enjoy Doom Eternal as well as Doom related content such as this, be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell to know when I upload next. This video topic was suggested to me by a speedrunner within the Doom community, ArrythmiaFPS. The idea of FPS playing a big role within Doom Eternal is intriguing to him as he often speaks about what aspects of the game are tied to FPS. I always wanted to give analyzing Doom Eternal a shot. I always strive to provide something interesting to the community, or the perfect videos someone would want to pull up before they eat their eggs in the morning. The idea of properties directly tied to frame rate in a fast-paced game like Doom Eternal always seemed kinda odd to me. One game that I can think of that has smaller things affected by frame rate would be Dead Space, the first entry to its series. Turning off VSync would cause body bags to flop around like the dead are trying to party one last time, and dead enemy models stretching way across the screen. That's only minor things that barely even play a role in influencing the difficulty in gameplay. Doom Eternal, however, is much different in comparison. I investigated the idea of FPS playing a big role in combat encounters, and at first I thought what was already known is all that we know, and then I discovered more than what we know. Before I get into my discoveries like a 1600 explorer, I just want to recap on what FPS-tied enemies and properties were already discovered by the community. Meat hooking is the most commonly known FPS-tied tech. The higher your frame rate, the faster you'll go as you strafe when attached to a demon. This can only work on PC due to having a no frame rate cap. But current-gen consoles can sorta experience 144 FPS meat hooking just through battle mode. Certain enemies can aimbot the player. The mancubus and pain elemental are the most common enemies that practically become hit-scanned enemies the closer you are to them. Most enemies in Doom Eternal, such as the Imp for example, will try to shoot you out of the sky, but instead of aiming directly at you, they'll aim ahead of you like a sniper does with a moving target. Your quick swaps are affected by FPS for those precise inputs, meaning if your frame rate is below 60, you may not be able to perform the high DPS precision bolt and rocket combo, or even the standard precision bolt and ballistic combo. Enemies also begin to become wonky if the FPS is altered. Most commonly, Barons of Hell performing a ground slam in midair, Hell Knights and Revenants standing on walls, and even Demon Gibbs just zooming across the screen after you killed them. That is what all of the community commonly knows, but I'm hoping in this video I can change all that. That's pretty much everything to include within that recap. Of course, I should also mention that most of these things directly impact the PC players since there's no FPS cap. Console players are locked at 60 FPS, and I would imagine that next-gen upgrades will be locked at 60 FPS too. Okay, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this video. What happens when you play at a frame rate higher or lower than 60 FPS? At a frame rate higher than the standard setting, the game speeds up a bit in terms of physics and properties, while at a frame rate lower than 60 FPS, slows the game down, and I mean literally slows it down with nearly everything. This is due to the fact that this game has been built for 60 FPS and was optimized to handle higher frame rates, but certain properties within the game engine must have been overlooked. Take the Super Mario 64 unofficial PC port for example. After compiling the game with a legally owned ROM, you can modify and run the game on PC. This includes bumping the FPS cap from 30 FPS to 60 FPS. However, a mod is required to have a stable 60 FPS. Since the game was built for 30 FPS on the Nintendo 64, going above 30 causes the game to speed up, while going below 30 causes the game to slow down. Even installing a 60 FPS mod that makes the game run smoothly without doubling the speed of gameplay, having FPS dips below 60 causes the game to slow down. That's how the game's engine works. Doom Eternal is no stranger to that. Playing at a higher FPS can certainly buff demons, but only certain types of demons while the rest stay the same. Hell Knights are one of them. These demons are a more in-your-face type of demon that will smack the player and slam the ground around you. At a higher FPS, they become more dangerous up close. Hell Knights receive a boost of distance every time they throw a swing at the player, meaning as they're lunging towards the player while on the ground, they can slide up and deal damage. This can sometimes catch the player off guard, predicting they're at a safe distance from the Hell Knight, but are soon told wrong. Upwards to 200 FPS, the Hell Knight begins to practically warp towards the player. 100 FPS, the boost is reduced significantly, but still in effect. And at 60 FPS, from the looks of it, the demon receives just a small boost during its lunging attack. Funny enough, the Hell Knight at 30 FPS practically has no boosts whatsoever when lunging at the player. Not only that, but much easier to maneuver around. Another demon with a similar buff is the Doom Hunter, but a little more special. The Doom Hunter can shoot projectiles at the player, but none of that matters in terms of how the FPS affects this demon. Much like how the Hell Knight is affected, the Doom Hunter receives a boost when performing melee attacks, and this is where it gets wonky. The Hell Knight has a specific melee attack that receives the boost. The Doom Hunter is boosted no matter what. At 200 FPS, they'll slip and slide all over the floor if you ever go near them. While it doesn't happen consistently, it does happen frequently. Paired with the horrendous CC, short for crowd control, a Doom Hunter could slide up to you, knock you back a few meters, and then slide straight towards you again, like an ice skating combo. With how the knockback completely stuns you temporarily, you're vulnerable to a game of pinball featuring you as the ball. Funny enough, at 60 FPS they receive no boosts whatsoever, they fight and operate normally as intended. Speaking of ice skating combos, wanna know why the carcass is so f***ing annoying? You guessed it. They slide too. Much like the Doom Hunter, they'll slide around at 200 FPS with its Beyblade melee attack. They could follow up with 2 Beyblade attacks paired with a CC like the Doom Hunter, however, consistently Beyblading the player doesn't happen very often. Whether it's tied to FPS or not, I've experienced multiple moments where Carcass would pin me against something and just melee me over and over and over until I could squeeze out and get away from him. Funny thing to add, if both you and the Carcass are standing next to a wall, he won't attack you at all. He'll just stare at you, licking its lips, probably fantasizing how badly he wants to Beyblade that sweet ass. One FPS influence thing I'd like to mention that doesn't have much to do with demons is picking up a clump of armor shards. This is something that I've noticed a lot when watching other streamers play Doom Eternal. From the looks of it, or from the sounds of it, having a higher FPS can produce that loud, crunchy armor pickup sound when you pick up a ton of armor at once. You basically hear the same sound effect overlap itself multiple times, creating that specific sound you hear. So I'm theorizing it's tied to the refresh rate of your monitor to overlap that sound effect when picking up a clump of armor shards. That's pretty much everything that I've discovered in terms of enemies receiving a buff the higher the frame rate. Jumping around testing out how each demon engages with the player at different frame rates did bring some interesting results. While it's nothing too crazy like making the demon overpowered to the point where you can't have a fair fight against them, it is however interesting to see how a few demons share the same FPS boost while others do not. But what is crazy is how Doom Eternal slows down and makes the game easier at 30 FPS. I've briefly covered this before in my Doom Eternal Switch review, but basically Doom Eternal running at 30 FPS slows the game down and makes enemy engagements a whole lot easier to engage in. Not only does it make combat encounters a breeze to fight, but can affect the environment as well as certain demons within the game that benefits the player a ton. By the way, I've got a question for you. Do you think setting your frame rate cap to 30 FPS when doing Ultra Nightmare runs is considered cheating? Personally, I don't really condone the idea of purposely knocking the frame rate down to make the hardest difficulty easier, but hey, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section down below. So, as I was saying, playing Doom Eternal at 30 FPS slows the game down. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean by the AI and projectiles within the game. That's what. An imp or manc could just shoot fireballs at you, but due to the reduced speed they travel at, you're given more time to react and maneuver around the projectile instead of noticing its trajectory heading straight for you and then getting hit shortly after. People might disagree with my thoughts about this, but I think that for the Switch version, this is perfect for people who play on that version alone. The Joy-Cons are pretty terrible for FPS titles, but with the reduced difficulty and reduced ability to perform well, thanks to these standard controllers, I think they go well together. For the Switch version, not the PC version of the game. But an enemy's AI and projectiles isn't all that I've noticed affected when running Doom Eternal at 30 FPS. There's a bit more to that, which kinda shocked me at first upon discovery. Enemies performing melee attacks tend to miss the player. Sounds weird, doesn't it? Well, you best believe me when I say this, but occasionally a demon might shoot or throw a swing at you, and you've got, I wanna say, a 25% chance of avoiding taking damage overall. This kinda reminds me of the Phantom hit from Super Smash Bros. Melee, where the player has a small chance to take damage but receives no knockback whatsoever when getting hit. This happens when the hitbox and hurtbox don't overlap, becoming tangent. That feels familiar in Doom Eternal, except you can avoid damage altogether. I don't think the whole hurtbox and hitbox not overlapping is the cause of this for Doom Eternal. From what I've gathered, strafing when engaging with demons is what causes it, rather than standing still or running forward towards the demon. While it's not RNG in Smash Melee, I like to think it's RNG in Doom Eternal, but only towards every other demon. There is one, however, that you can consistently avoid taking damage from altogether, no matter how many times you strafe around it. If you hated the tentacles, then oh boy, you're gonna love this. At 30 FPS, the tentacles cannot hit you if you strafe around them. In case you don't believe me, here's footage of me walking side by side like a crab, not even taking a smidge of damage. Hell, it happened to me with two of them side by side. Going back up to 60 FPS, the tentacle will hit you consistently if you try to strafe around them close by. Of course, nothing game-breaking, but for some people that despise the tentacle, this might be game-breaking for them. Speaking of avoiding damage, I've been told this is a speedrunning strat, so I'll just cover this one briefly. At 30 FPS, it's pretty difficult to perform B-hops as you might need to buffer your inputs as you make contact with the ground. With hazardous floors such as lava, toxic waste, or even electric floors, attempting to B-hop can help you travel along those floors without taking any damage. Think about that Super Mario Sunshine glitch, where if you clip through a surface and land underneath the world, you'll die if you make contact with the collision for too long. In order to maneuver around, you gotta jump consistently, not sparing a second to run, but keeping yourself in the air. That same technique applies within Doom Eternal, except if you walk on lava for a bit, you'll just take damage instead of dying immediately. Something minor I'd like to mention before wrapping this section up: when performing a glory kill or chainsawing a demon, you can see them enter a T-pose just before they begin the animation. You can only catch this at 30 FPS. Pretty cool, huh? I've spent days hopping around each demon in hopes of finding something unique about them depending on the frame rate, and at first I thought, there won't be that much to discover, and clearly, I was wrong. That being said, I'm not saying that I discovered everything tied to FPS. I know that eventually we'll be seeing more clips and people share their own discoveries on what else is affected by FPS. That is, if Idsoftware doesn't rework the engine a bit and patch it all out. They were able to remove FPS-influenced meat hooks in battle mode, and on top of that, set a speed limit for meat hooks in battle mode both on PC and console. I know they can't fix everything, but perhaps in the future, maybe fix a few that players struggle with the most. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. Consider dropping a like and sharing this video around so others may know about each FPS-tied properties and enemies I've discovered in this video. I do have a few announcements I'd like to share, but if you're not interested, then thanks for watching, and have yourself a great day. But if you are interested, then I have just a few things I'd like to share. I've been thinking about this for a while, and decided to open up a Patreon. If you enjoy my content and would like to support me even further, plus receive some perks, then come check it out. You watching my stuff already means a lot to me, but if you're willing to support me even further, then I'll forever be grateful for that. Also, me and a couple buddies of mine have been doing a podcast called The Releasists. It's all about what's releasing in the next upcoming months or within this year. Stuff like movies, TV shows, but more importantly, video games. Here's a snippet of our podcasts.
But I mean, when I was 13, you know what? I was pretty turned on by Michael Jordan. I don't know how you guys feel about that. I'm really worried about him, honestly. I'm afraid he might be too squishy.
Why give him genitals? Like, what's the purpose?
I have no idea what that is.
We try to stay on topic at times, but if this is something you're interested in, then come check us out. We stream every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Link will be in the description down below. Thanks a lot for watching, and until next time, keep slaying.